We're at Masechet Pesachim, daf 39, all about maror. The entire daf is about maror up until the end. It's very interesting. We have daf after daf about masa, but just one lone page about maror. I guess it's a lot more simple. You don't have to make the maror. You don't have to worry about it becoming chametz. We just want to know what kinds of species would be bitter enough that they can fit into the category of eating maror. All right, so the Mishnah is going to list 5 species, maybe parallel to the 5 different kinds of grain. So chazeret is what we would call romaine lettuce. Tamha, chervel, oba chabina, and eringo, oba aloshin, endives, uba maror. Okay, interesting to have something just called maror at the end. Maybe it's referring to something specific, or maybe it's just saying anything that is bitter. So, it's kind of open-ended, one at the end there. Good. Yotzin behen, ben lachin, ben yeveshin. In what state? It doesn't matter whether they are moist or they're dried out. That's both fine. Avalo kivushin, velo shilukin, velo mevushalin. However, they cannot be pickled or boiled. Shilukin sounds like you pour boiling water on top of it, a kind of quick boil. Mevushalin is actually cooked in a pot. That's not good. That's going to change the taste, and they're not going to be bitter anymore. But they can be dried out. Good. And you don't have to eat all of one type of species. You can take some romaine lettuce, some endives, which is practical because a lot of times we get served both of them, and you want to have a kezait all together, so you can have some of this and some of that one and fulfill the mitzvah with both. Also, you can eat the stalk, not only the leaves, but also the stalk is fine. And now this is these are vegetables, so you have to give teruma, maaser. If it's demai, in other words, you got it from a ma'aretz, and you're not 100% sure that he took teruma maaser, still fine. I remember we said because you could give up all of your property, and then you'd be poor, and then you would be eligible to eat demai. So it is potentially edible, but it does have to be kosher, edible. Or the first tithe that you give to the Levi, and if the Levi gave the teruma, the maaseh min maaseh to the Kohen, then that's edible, so that's okay. And also maaseh sheni, the owner had maaseh sheni, or he made it hekdesh, but he redeemed it for money, then that lettuce, that maror would also be edible and therefore permitted. Okay, this is probably why this is here. This follows the previous Mishnah, which gave the same list regarding different kinds of matzah. Also has to be something edible in these different categories. All right, so that's the Mishnah. Here's some pictures. Here's the hazeret that we all know, the romaine lettuce. And here's the chabina, is something like this, field eringo. Olashin endives are right here, and maror may be referring to this kind of plant. Okay, good. So, some kind of thistle. All right. So that's what the Mishnah says. Now the Gemara is going to just discuss different names and other types of species. That's the beginning of the Gemara. Chazeret hasa, that is lettuce. Olashin hindibi. So even in Aramaic, it sounds like endives. Tamcha marababa barhana tamcheta shemha. You're just translating it into Aramaic. Had habina amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish asvata de dikla. That's something that grows around the palm tree. Maror merirata. It's a specific plant that's called the merirata. Good. So Taneh bar kapara. So bar kapara had the following teaching: Elu yerakot shadam yoseh b'hnidechot pesach be'olashin. So also endives, batamcha, chervel, b'achad halin, b'achad chabinin. So some kind of something else, and something that's a field eringo. Okay. Uba chazirin, that's the chazeret. Rav Yehuda omer af olshe sadeh ve'olshe gina ve'chazeret. Rav Yehuda adds to these things also the wild endives and the endives in the garden, and also chazeret, which is the regular lettuce. Now, so that's the end of Bar Kapara statement. This is strange. Why does Rabbi Yehuda adding these things that they were already mentioned? Ol shegina v'chazeret hatana la resha. Right, already in the first, the majority opinion here said olashin. That includes all olashin, and also mentioned chazarin. That's the same as chazeret. So now, what Rav Yehuda? What are you adding? This is what he meant to say. I might have thought from the first opinion that it meant that it's only those of those of the garden, and so now he's coming to add that those of the wild ones are also the same as the ones in the garden and kosher, also just like lettuce can be used. Good. Rabbi Meir Omer, now going back, af asvas vetura umad yedoar. Okay, he includes these three things. The last one is some kind of sweet myrrh. Wouldn't seem to be that, it doesn't sound so bitter, but apparently it is. Amar le Rabbi Aseh, as vas v'tura echadhu, umar zehu yedoar. So he says this matter refers to some other kind of plant that is in fact bitter. Good. Taneh debe Shemuel, elu yedakot shadam yoseh bahen yidecha b'tov Pesach, b'chazeret, ba'olashin, so lettuce and endives, b'tamcha, chervel, b'char binin, field eringo, b'char ginin, u'b'char dofanin. Okay, these are the two items. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af chazeret yolin v'chazeret galin, kay yoseh bahen. We really need a botanist to explain all these things. We'll do a show and tell one day. We'll go to a farm. Okay, so these are also these are also, you can fulfill your obligation with these different items. This chazeret galin looks like this. It is found in Israel on roadsides and in garbage heaps. Sounds delicious. And interestingly, it contains a milky fluid or sap. They're known as, they always face north and south. They're known as hasat hamatzpen, because it's like it shows safon. So that's very interesting. You find one, at least you know your way. Okay, but it doesn't look that appetizing. But that you can use that for the maror. Okay, good. Rabbi Eli Omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Af ar kabelim. Okay, that too is good. Vechazati akol tamida bikashti lichaber v'lo masati. Rabbi Eli says, I heard from Rabbi Eliezer that you can use this vegetable, but I couldn't find anyone else to back up my tradition, because I only heard it alone from Rabbi Eliezer. So now he wasn't sure if Rabbi Eliezer really said it. Did he remember correctly? And so and then I found a friend who said, yes, I remember hearing that tradition as well. So he was able to confirm his memory. Okay, so up till now, we've been just talking about specific names of species. But now the Rabbi Yehuda adds a general rule. Anything that has white sap is fine. Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka Omer, kol shepanav machsifin. If a surface is light green color, then that's going to be maror. Acharim omerim kol yarak mar yesh lo seraf ufanav machsifin. Third opinion, Acharim says, anything that is bitter will also, kind of by definition, have white sap, and it will be light green. Good, so actually they're not arguing. They sound like they're all agreeing when saying the same thing. These are all different ways of telling if something is in fact bitter, and that would be maror. And this is what we can follow. This is something very interesting, that the word lettuce, what is the etymology of the word lettuce? It actually comes from lactation, meaning milk, because it has a milky sap. So in fact, this is the Gemara is referring to something that is the same as the derivation of our English word. Good. Now, Ravina ashkachehe l'Rav Acha bered Rava dehava mehader amerirata. Okay, now funny story. Ravina saw Rav Acha. He was looking for something bitter. He was looking for like the most bitter thing he could find, so that he can use it for his maror. He says, well, what do you think? That it has to be as bitter as possible? The Mishnah mentions chazeret. We have another source also, just lettuce. Yoshe even says the best thing to use is just romaine lettuce. even though it's not the most bitter. That's fine. And we said that that's what it means. It means chasa, it means lettuce. So you don't have to go find the most bitter thing. This is the best thing to use. That's interesting. Why? Right? We would think that Torah says maror, okay, the more bitter the better. No, this is why. My hasa, the hasrachamana ilavan, because it's also a play on words, not with the word maror, but with the Aramaic hasa, because God had mercy on us. So it's kind of like a play on words, like the foods that we eat on Rosh Hashanah. We also do that. So we should think maror not only symbolizes the bitterness, but also the redemption. אמר רבי שמואל בר נחמני אמר רבי יוחנן למה נמשלו מיסים כמרור? לומר לך מה מרור זה שתחילתו רך וסופו קשה, אך אף מצריים תחילתן רכה וסופן קשה. Amar le hadri bi. And another reason why it's good to use lettuce is because lettuce, at the beginning, it tastes okay and only has a sharp, bitter taste at the end. It's the aftertaste that's bad. And that is more appropriate because so too the Egyptians, at first, everything also, the maror is soft at first, and then as it grows bigger, it gets harder. And so this is the Egyptians also. They were soft in the beginning, and only then they got hard. In the beginning, as you know, we see in this week's parasha, we go down to Egypt, we're treated well, we get the best land, and we feel very at home and comfortable there. Too comfortable that we don't go back even after the famine. And then things get a little harsher. There's the corvée, forced labor. And then there's the propaganda that we're going to be an enemy nation, the fifth column. And then soon enough, we're enslaved and the boys are thrown into the river. And so you see, just like it starts off at, no, this seems okay, right? It'll taste good. But then you get the sharp taste at the end. So that's why the lettuce is the best, even though it's not the most bitter, but it symbolically represents the experience of that slow slavery and then redemption, represents that better than other vegetables. All right, so that's, I think, really beautiful and at the heart of this whole discussion. Okay. Amar le Rab Rechumi l'Abaye. Oh, and by the way, then he changed his mind. Abacha was looking for the most bitter. He says, "Oh, you're right. I'm going to use romaine lettuce from now on." Amar le Rab Rechumi l'Abaye. Mimayda hai maror min yaraku. He says, "Hold on. This maror? To us is maror, meaning something bitter. I can find something very bitter, but it does. Who said it has to be a vegetable? Ema merirata de chufya. How about the bile of a fish, a kufya fish like this, a mackerel?" The bile inside the fish, really, really bitter. Nobody eats it. Okay, but why not? So the answer is dumia de masa. Masa gidule karka, maror gidule karka. We make an analogy between masa and maror that mentioned together in the pasuk. And so, just like masa grows from the ground, so too we have to get something that grows from the ground for maror. Ve'ema hirduf. Okay, I can find a bush. It's not a plant. It's this kind of, it's not an herb, but it's this kind of bush here that is extremely bitter, and it's so bitter it's even poisonous sometimes. So why not use that? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Dumya de masa. Masa means zera'im. Maror means zera'im. No, it can't be a tree. This is too much like a tree. It grows tall. It has to be something that is like an herb. Okay. Ve'ema harzipu. So why not this? This is a vegetable that also can be poisonous and is not tree-like. It's vegetable-like. Okay, further limitation has to be something that you can buy with maaser sheni money, right? If you redeem your maaser sheni and you live in Haifa and you bring the money to Jerusalem, you can spend that money only on food. So this has to be something that people normally eat, and this plant nobody eats because it tastes horrible and it might be poisonous. So therefore, it has to be something that is actually edible most of the time. All right, good. Amar le Rabba bar Rav Hanin le Abaye ema maror had. It says, you gave me now all these different species, but why not just say maror is one singular, right? Maror. Ema maror had merurim ketiv. So no, we say no. It does not only one species that we have to specify, because it says amasot umerorim. Actually, says many species. All right, fine. It says multiple ve'ema merorim today, but the smallest amount that's still plural is two. So why don't you say that there are two species and no more? Who said that there's so many that you can use? Answer is dumiyat de masa. Masa minin harbe, af maror minin harbe. Just like masa, there's 5 different grains we can use. So this backs up what I said before, that I think the Mishnah purposely lists 5 species of maror, even though there are many. And the Gemara after brought all different kinds of species, but we say 5 as to be similar to masa. But the point is, not only one specific species, any kinds of plants that are bitter would be fine. Amar Rabba Rav Huna Amar Rav. Okay, so in the name of Rav, the first generation Amora in Bavel, he says, Yidakot Shemru Chamim Shadam Yoseh Bahen Yidei Chovato B'Pesach Kulan Nizra'in Paruga Achat. Okay, regarding kilayim, the law of kilayim that you can't plant diverse species together means that if it's different species, you can't put them together. But if it's 2 or 3 subspecies, in other words, different types within a species, then you can plant them together. So Rav here is saying that all the items that are permitted to use for maror, they can all be planted within one little garden. In other words, they're all part of the same species. Even though they look like lots of different things, they're all really one. So Rav is in fact kind of looks like he's limiting what you can use for maror to one basic species. So he's a lot more limiting than the opinions that we saw above. This seems to be contradictory to something else Rav says, but it looks like we want to try to reinterpret this because it's very limiting and not in line with what we've been saying so far. So so when he says that you can plant them all together, is he saying that there's no law of kilayim, that you can plant these as different species within one little area? Metiv Rava, but we have a question from Rava. Chazeret, from a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Kilayim. And the Mishnah is going to list different species that you can or cannot plant together. So Chazeret v'Chazeret Galin. So these 2 different kinds of lettuce, those 2 you can plant together. Even though they're different, they're the same species. Also, Olashin v'Olshe Sadeh, garden endives and wild endives. Those are 2 different things, but since they're the same species, you can plant those together without leaving any space. And so to all the others than the Kedishin v'Chishre Sadeh, Kuspar v'Chuspar Sadeh, Chadar v'Chadar Misri, Udlata Misri v'Har Musa. All these, mustard and Egyptian mustard, and Kilayim Zeh Bazeh, Egyptian gourd and Chumesta, all these things are the same type, and so therefore they're not Kilayim with each other. Now we mentioned Chazeret v'Chazeret Galin in Chazeret v'Olashin la. So don't we understand this, that yes, you can use romaine lettuce and this other kind of lettuce, those together, but those and endives doesn't say you can, mix and match different things. So the Mishnah mentioned lettuce and endives, and so those are different species, and that's inconsistent with what Rav said, that they're all part of the same species. So and maybe you'll interpret this Mishnah to mean that all the things in this list can all be planted together. No, that's not a good interpretation. Even Rav himself didn't say that. Zugot katane. This is in pairs, right? These 2 can be planted together. The next 2 can be planted together, right? But not all at once. So therefore, you see that the things listed in Mishnah are actually different species altogether. So this goes against what Rav just said, that they can be planted, that all marors can be planted together. So we're going to reinterpret that. My nizra'in damarav, nizra'in kehilchatan. What he means is that they can be planted according to the proper procedure, that you leave space in between. So in fact, what he said was the opposite of what we thought he said, or what his words seemed to say. All the different species of maror, you can only plant them together if you space them out. When we say space them out, what we mean, we're about to quote the Mishnah that says this. If you have a small garden, a small plot that's just 6 by 6 tefachim, the Mishnah says you can still find a way to plant 5 different species in it if you lay it out in a certain way, 4 on the sides and 1 in the middle. So that's permitted, right? There is space in between, and they look different, so they're not getting mixed up in that way. So that's what he said. You have to do it in this way, and then it's okay. So therefore, it's really the opposite. They are in fact different species, and they could not be planted together, one on top of each other. Now, is that what he's teaching? Kilchatan tanena. Wait, but we would know that already. That's explicit in the Mishnah in Kilayim. That says aruga shisha tefachim, a little plot of land. It's just 6 by 6 tefachim, very small. So rim betocha chamisha zer onin. You can, if you need to, plant 5 different species in it. How? Arba al arba duchot aruga ve'achat be'emsa, 4 on the sides and 1 in the middle. How the tema hanimele bizra'in haval birakot lo kamash malan. So I might have thought that Mishnah is talking about herbs and not vegetables. And so that's why Rav is coming to teach me that these different kind of species of maror are vegetables, and even those, it's permitted to plant them in such a way. Maybe I would think that herbs are smaller, and so don't take up so much space, and that would be allowed. But perhaps plants would not be allowed because they're bigger, and their roots are bigger, and they take up more space. And so that's why Rav says all the different kinds of maror can be planted in this way. Maybe that's what he was teaching. All right, it's a good try, except that it totally contradicts the next Mishnah and Kilayim. Lememra dirakot alima mizraim. Are you saying that vegetables are more stringent than herbs? When we say herbs, we mean also like grains and things like that. V'hatanan kol minei zeraim en zorin ba'aruga achat. We actually said the opposite, that different kinds of herbs, they usually, when you plant grains and herbs, you plant a lot of them. So you cannot use this leniency of putting 5 in 1. So it actually does not apply to herbs at all. This whole law only applies to vegetables. Only to vegetables. So this answer doesn't make sense. So back to our question, what was Rav trying to teach us? Rather, he could be the following. We might have thought that some of these things that we call maror are actually herbs, and he says no, they are vegetables, and therefore you can use this leniency for all the things that are on the list of maror. Okay, good. Next, now wait, could you really think, a question on that answer, could you possibly think that any types of the maror are herbs and not plants? The Mishnah starts off with the words "V'hatanan yirakot." These are the vegetables, so it says they're vegetables. Everybody calls them vegetables. Now we do need it because of the chazeret, the romaine lettuce, because although it starts off soft, once it gets bigger, the stalk gets harder, and so you might think that it needs more room and would not be able to use this leniency, and that's why he had to say even lettuce you're allowed to use. You plant 5 in 1 plot. That's what Rav was teaching us the whole time. All right. Lava amar Rabbi, and the proof for this. Lava amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. Kelach shel keruv she'uksha marchibin lo bet rova. A cabbage stalk of a cabbage that became hard. You have to, in fact, leave a lot of space around it. So alma kivantus volakshot yabinan le'erav chateve. So we might have right, since it's going to become hard, therefore we have to leave a lot of space. We might have thought that romaine lettuce also, we can't do this. We have to leave it more space. Kamash malan. That's what I was trying to teach us, that you can plant even lettuce in this fashion. Okay, so in the end, Rav seemed to be saying that all the different species of maror are one species. That was kind of limiting it, but no, in fact, he was telling us that they're just all different kinds of vegetables, and as vegetables, even lettuce can be planted together in 1 plot if you use that layout. All right, good. Now, the next part of the Mishnah says, after we dealt with different species, says, Yosin behen ben lachin ben yeveshin. Whether they are moist or dried out leaves, you can use them, it's fine. Okay, after that, afterwards, the next line down, the Mishnah mentioned that you can have the stalks too, not only the leaves, but also the stalks. So what's the relationship between moist and dry and between the line after that says stalks? Amar Rav Chisda lo shanu ela bekelach. When we say moist and dry, that only refers to the stem. If the stem is moist or the stem is dry, you can use it for maror. Aval ba'alin, but regarding the leaves, lachin in yeveshin lo, only if the leaves are moist. But dry leaves, they're not going to taste like anything, and so they cannot be used. All right, so we're going to question this reading of Rav Chisda. Right, the simple reading of Mishnah doesn't seem so because it lists everything and it says whether moist or dry, and then the line after it says, "Oh, and you can also use the stem," which made it sound like everything before that was talking about the leaves, and so dry leaves should be okay. So Rav Chisda would say, no, perusheka mefaresh. It's limiting and explaining the previous statement. When we mentioned moist or dry, what we meant is only the stem, but not the leaves. The leaves have to be moist. All right, so that's a possible reading in the words of the Mishnah, but it contradicts a Braita. Meti be yosin behen ubekelach shelahen ben lachin ben yebeshin dibre meir. So the first opinion is Rabbi Meir says you can for maror you can use anything, whether the leaves or the stem, whether moist or whether dry. That sounds like everything. Chachamim omrim lachin yosin behen yebeshin en yosin behen. The Chachamim only make a distinction between moist and dry. They don't make any distinction between the leaves and the stem. They all agree that if it's not quite dry, it's just withered, right? It's in between moist and dry, then that's fine. So withered is okay, but not cooked, not pickled, not boiled. All those are no good. All right, that's the Baraita. So what's the point for us? Kol sheyesh bo ta'am maror yosin bo, kol shen bo ta'am maror en yosin bo. So that's the Braita is continuing. As long as it has the taste of maror, I mean, you can taste it yourself and see. And so when these things are dried or when they're cooked, they're not going to taste bitter anymore. Okay, what's the point for us is that according to the first opinion here, it makes no difference whether it's the leaf or the stalk. They can be used moist or dry. According to the second opinion, it also doesn't make a difference. Both the leaf and the stalk, moist are okay, dry are not okay. Neither of these opinions fits with Rav Chisda, who made a distinction and said the stalk can be moist or dry, but the leaves have to be moist, right? There's no opinion like that in the Braita. So how is he going to answer that? He can answer that. Targuma akelach. You can explain that. No, the Bimeir's statement is actually talking about the stem. When he says you can fulfill with yosin behen kelach, but the leaf or the stem, and then the words lachin libeshin are talking about only about the stem, not about the leaf. Okay, not really the natural way of reading Bimeir, but possible. So he answers that question. Tanur banan en yosin behen kemushin. Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Sadok Amidu Yosin behen kemushin. Okay, regarding the withered, although here we said everyone agrees that the withered is okay, and that is the first opinion. Yosin, here we see it's actually machloket. The first opinion says that withered is not okay. That's like dry, whereas Rabbi Eliezer Sadok says it's fine. Withered is like moist and it can be used. All right, now a question. We asked the same question about Masa, applies to Maror also. Now, there is going to be a distinction, which is that wheat and the 7 grains, right, different kinds of grains and fruit, you have to bring Maaser Sheni Mideoraita. However, Maaser Sheni does not apply to vegetables Mideoraita. Only the rabbis came and said, vegetables, you have to bring Maaser Sheni Midirabanan. So this maror is going to be Maaser Sheni only midrabanan. Nevertheless, you have to eat it in Jerusalem or redeem it. So now, what if I grow some maror in my garden and I bring it to Yerushalayim and I want to eat that maror in Yerushalayim as to fulfill my commandment? Is that permitted? Answer: Alibad Rabbi Akiva lati ba'ela chashtab masad oraita nafek b'marod rabanan mibaya. Okay, remember Rabbi Akiva was one that said masad as Maaser Sheni is permitted to use for the mitzvah, and that is Maaser Sheni with the oraita status. So if that's allowed, then all the more so maror, which is only maaseh sheni midrabanan, right? Really midoraita. It's not. It's just regular produce. So for sure, according to the Akiba, it would be okay. Kiti ba'elach alibad Rabbi Yosef HaGalili. Mai b'masad oraita hu de la nafek. Aval marod rabanan nafek. What about Rabbi Yosef HaGalili? He's the one that said matzah, which is maaseh sheni midoraita, you cannot use for the mitzvah. So maybe only because that is maaseh sheni midoraita, but maror is only maaseh sheni midrabanan. So therefore, it doesn't really have the law of maaseh sheni, and so you can use it for maror. Or do you say, even though the rabbi, it's only midrabanan, that's Maaser Sheni, still, whenever the rabbis make a takana, they say you have to apply all the laws as if it was actually a deoraita. And so therefore, the rabbis, by declaring the maror to be Maaser Sheni, perhaps they are removing it from the ability to use as maror, just like masa. That's the two sides of the question. And Rava answers with just a simple halacha, marava mistabera, masa maror. It makes sense that maror would have the same law as masa. In other words, the second possibility, according to Biasai Galili, just like you cannot use maaseh sheni for masa, so too you cannot use it for maror. Okay, that concludes the discussion of maror, and next Mishnah will begin. We go back to masa. Or chametz. En shorin tamursan la tarnegolim aval holtin. Because we're talking about the bran, which is kind of left over after you make the flour and sift it out. The coarse bran is left over. It doesn't become chametz very easily, but maybe there's a little bit of flour still connected to the bran. So that's what we're trying to figure out. What do you do with that bran? They would use it for different things, as we'll see right now. So you're not allowed to soak the bran to feed to the chickens. Because by soaking it for a long time, then surely any flour that's mixed up with it is going to become chametz. Aval holtin, but what you can do is pour boiling water on top of the bran before feeding it. That will soften it up, and that'll be a quickly heating it up. It's only a small amount of exposure to water for a small amount of time, and so that it's also hot, so it's cooking it. Anything that's already cooked is not going to become chametz. So you can't soak it, but you can boil it quickly. Second, haisha lo tishre et hamursan shetolich beyada lamerchatz. So a woman should not soak bran and to bring to the bathhouse. Apparently, she would use it as a cleanser, because again, soaking it for a long time, it may become chametz. Aval shafahi bibsara yavesh, but she can bring it to the bathhouse dry and then just rub her skin with it. And so the little bit of moisture that's on her skin, we're not worried. Well, that will make it chametz. Third application, don't chew wheat. Now this is wheat, and put it on the wound, because even the saliva that gets mixed up with it can make it chametz, and so that's going to be sitting there for a while, and that become chametz. So that's also not allowed. All right, that's the Mishnah. We'll see just the beginning of the discussion here. In order to stop something from the leavening process, you have to do one of the following. Ha'afui. Once something is baked, it cannot become chametz again, right? That's why, like, we could take matzah meal, which is already matzah, and then we can recook it and connect it and mix it with water and all that. Once something is baked, it will not leaven anymore. V'mevushal, something that's boiled also. V'chalut shechalato berotchin. So boil this. If I took this dough and I put it into boiling water, it won't leaven anymore after that. And also, if I took boiling water and pour it on top, a lot of boiling water, and pour it on top of the flour, then it will not become leaven anymore. Okay. The last thing we don't do anymore. Rambam and others say that we know we're not sure if the water will be hot enough, and if we know how to do it quite correctly. So halachal maseh, we don't do that anymore. Now, question on mevushal. Mevushal adim bashele mehama. Well, while you're cooking it, it actually will become hametz, especially if you put it into cold water and then you heat it up, right? While you're cooking it, not necessarily preheated. So then it will actually become chametz. So boiling doesn't look like it's a good option because making it all wet, and it will become chametz. Amar papa fui shebishelo kamad. He says you're right. So he's going to actually remove it by taking away this and here. Hafui shebishelo. Once you cook it and once you bake it in an oven, if you boil it after, it's okay, right? Once it's so really, but boiling by itself could be a problem. Tanya. Braita. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer kemach shenafal letocho delef. Interesting halacha. Afilu kolem kulo eno bali de chimutz. If you have flour and you have a stream of water continually dripping onto the dough, onto the flour, it won't become chametz. It's constantly moving, and so it won't become fermented. Okay, not if it's one drop after another, it has to be a stream, right? Each drop is connected to the other, as long as it's continually getting more and more wet. So at that point, it will not become chametz, but as soon as the water stops, then you're going to have to go and cook it. And lastly, Amre debe Rabbi Shela Vatika Share. So a certain pastry that it's made with oil and salt. This is permitted. All right, good. Vahatanya Vatika Asur. Hold on. We have another braita that says this pastry is not allowed. And Sir Lakashia Hada Abde B'Meshicha Milcha Hada Abde B'Mayau Milcha. When we said it's Asur, that's the first one that says permitted is when we make it with oil and salt only. So if you have flour, oil, and salt, and that's the only ingredients, then it's not chametz, it's fine. But if you add water to it also, water and salt, then it will become chametz. So this is very important because this is what we call masa ashira, which we've discussed before in the previous discussion. It wasn't always clear whether it was only honey and oil or with water also. But in practice, if it has water in it, then it will become chametz. But if it's only oil or only juice, that's what we call masa ashira, which Sephardim are generally lenient about that, and Ashkenazim are more stringent regarding masa ashira. But technically, it cannot become chametz if it does not have water in it, and this would be the source for that. So we'll end here, and we'll almost done with the perek. Another couple of dapim. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen ve'amen.